So we have 30 minutes and we have 3 very smart and experienced negotiators up here. So we want to use the time very well. Darren, Steve, and Rick. The plan for the next 30 minutes is that we're going to go through a couple of questions and then we're going to turn it over to the floor for questions for 15 minutes and then we're going to have a lightning round where we're going to summarize with a couple of key tips. But let's start this off. Darren, does your agency have a well-defined negotiating strategy or philosophy? Who's involved on the team and why?
So yes, we do. I think I shared a little bit of it with you earlier, but just to go into a little bit more of the specific details of it. So the first thing I always believe is that in any negotiation, you should make sure that you don't allow the decoupling of the negotiation into components. And the reason why I raise that as being a very important part is I've seen all too often the conversation around a contract negotiation being divorced from the demand of the agency from a service offering and indeed the compensation component they want to pay your agency for that service. And if you don't understand the terms and conditions that are being placed into your contract, whether they're the financial transaction terms, payment terms, whether they're the intellectual property rights, whether they're the audit requirements that you're being asked to comply with, the additional administrative burdens of reporting that you're being asked to comply with. How can you actually get into a good, solid, firm negotiation around your agency service offering? So to ensure that clients respect the fact that we as an agency are principled around having one conversation about how we get paid, we established a deal team. And the deal team is made up of our general counsel, our legal general counsel, one of our most senior client finance negotiators, and indeed Skip as part of our agency business. And that team is schooling itself on all the different ways we as an agency are being compensated internally within our own business. And also importantly, we're making sure that they're being fully educated around all of the trends that we're seeing in the market. And their job is to spend time partnering with the client organization. Help bring that acumen and partnership to how our client teams are selling our agency services. And as I said before, there is no doubt in my mind that we will fail miserably if the deal team goes in alone without the partnership of the client organization that's running the business. Because we must never allow them to divorce the fact that there's a reality to the service offering, there's an appreciation and understanding of the quality of what we're doing that needs to be put front and center with every conversation. And that knowledge won't exist in the deal team alone. So yes, we have a principle. It's one that, as I said earlier, I think it's permeated through 50% of probably our client negotiations, and we need to continue to accelerate it through the rest of the negotiations.
Darren, does this deal team work on all domestic clients, or does it involve global relationships as well? How do you decide who does what?
They are actually talented enough to deal with domestic and global. What I would say is that we do also have people within our global organization who will have particular expertise and skills. So I'm not saying that it has to be that set 3 people that I believe we've established for our business, Skip, Barbara and Laura, but it's the types and the roles that need to be, I think, present for every negotiation. So there's no doubt there are people that have tremendous global experience around client compensation, and I would want to make sure that that person is appropriately represented, along with along with the other 2 skills that are needed.
So, for example, let's say that your Sao Paulo office is going to negotiate a contract with an important Latin American client that may be served by 3, 4 different offices. Is that something that you get involved with, or do you train the local people? How do you make sure that they're negotiating the way that you would like them to?
Well, it's funny you choose Brazil as a choice because, I mean, I know the Brazilian market very well. You know, one of my jobs prior to just looking after the North American region was to look after Latin America and Asia, and previous to that Europe. And in Brazil, there can be no substitute for the experience of working within the Brazilian market. There are numerous local laws, taxes, rules that you just cannot discount. You just cannot have the experience sat somewhere centrally within your global company. And the way I would look at it is this, is that the team you form should be a team that has the representatives who you know can make the biggest contribution. So in those particular cases, I would expect the finance director of our Brazilian operation to be part of the deal team. And as it relates to global compensation, I always, I took this from Rick, is that you need to make sure they understand the global principles of how you as a global network want to be compensated, so that they don't go and do something that will compromise you later. Because as we all know, you'll only be as strong as the weakest link and the weakest negotiation. And I've seen some of the negotiations that have been done, and they certainly wouldn't, you know, help our businesses here in the US ever achieve the profitability that we need to achieve.
Thank you. Rick Weber. When a multi-agency contract is being discussed, which a lot of us have done or are doing now, how do you coordinate negotiating strategy among the participants from the different agencies within your group or the holding company?
All right, well, typically you need to take a team-oriented approach. It's what was worked well for us in the past is it's over-communicating. It's getting a team together, whether it's finance, legal, project management, and the account leads, but also input from the disciplines. And it's getting sort of a basic strategy agreed in the beginning, literally in a meeting or a conference call. You know, it's establishing clear lines of communication up front as the process occurs. It's designating 2 or 3 key people as the decision makers. You know, once you go through contract calls and negotiations and whatnot, and then feedback loops back to the core team. You know, we had a call with the client, here's where we went, here are the key issues, you know, here's the pushback, where do we go from here? It's getting pretty rigorous financial and other information, scope information development in advance, so we have the information with us, you know, through our regional management and all that. So it's a fairly involved process and pretty consistent over time. It's having, you know, the key leadership team in place, having checkpoints, check-ins, meetings, calls to get the proper information, feed it back out to people, and then bring it into the center and have key decision makers, you know, throughout the process. But you can't have 12 people negotiating on a call with a client. You really need to have 1 or 2 people, 3 people, and 1 from each of the 3 key disciplines doing that and then feeding back to everyone. It's really over-preparing and over-communicating are the 2 keys to doing it.
Do you sometimes negotiate in 2 stages? Like you'll negotiate the T's and C's for all the companies and then negotiate compensation on a by discipline basis, or is it one compensation discussion?
It depends on, clients largely drive this, right? We will certainly negotiate, if there's a master services agreement, we will negotiate the basic terms and conditions in one round. You know, it's more centralized, right? If there's a compensation methodology that would apply to all scopes of work around the world, then that would be negotiated, you know, in a separate phase. And we may try to have different negotiation or compensation methodologies for different disciplines. There might be a different one for media, for more, you know, project-oriented business, the basic core retainer. You know, again, that's sort of methodology negotiate. I would that'd be the best case. Like I said, a master services agreement with the terms and conditions that were pretty standard around the network. You would have a compensation methodology that's applied to each different project or scope of work, right? And then each team would negotiate the actual scope of work more close to local operations and how many hours or what the commission rates are, whatever they are for each individual assignment or sub-assignment.
Cool. It's a question for Steve Goldstein, my brother from another mother, as they say. There's a recent ANA study that shows there's a huge gap between what procurement understands and what marketing wants. So when you're negotiating a contract, when you're working with procurement, how do you make sure that client procurement understands the expectations and the goals that the marketing people have said they expect from you?
So first of all, the study that Mark is referring to is the ANA study that was done back in 2010, and it's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it was done on the procurement departments within our client companies. So I highly recommend, it's extremely revealing, the study. And it does show the huge gaps that we have between our clients, our marketing clients, and the procurement department. And I just think one of the questions that they asked, I mean, let me just read this, to the statement, in procurement-led reviews, price often trumps quality and innovation of the work presented. Only 8% of procurement people agreed with that statement. 63% of our marketing clients agreed with that statement. So you can see that's the gap. And that's the heart of the problem that we're dealing with, extremely revealing. So what do we do? How do we deal with that right now? I mean, what we have to make sure is, first and foremost, when we're being briefed on a piece of business, on what the objectives are, on what the scope is, in addition to your team, your cross-discipline team, in addition to that, you have to make sure that procurement is in the room with your marketing client. There's nothing worse than being separated and throwing the procurement people to finance and leaving them alone. You're dead when that happens. The second thing is that your team has to be very well informed and kept abreast of all of the client issues. If we can control all of the information, we're in a better position. And I mean, I think the final thing is, I mean, I say this all the time, I really think the procurement departments are the most powerful parts of our client organizations now. I mean, they are the people that save millions and billions of dollars for the CEO. And our marketing clients, unfortunately, are afraid of procurement. We have to embolden our marketing clients, and that means it's up to you, the marketing, the account leaders, to embolden our client marketing people to make sure they're prepared to stand up in the boardroom to the procurement department. It's just critical.
To that point, I overheard a conversation at a client procurement summit that we were invited to once, where the CEO admitted that when it gets to be 3 weeks before the end of the quarter and he needs another 2 cents a share, he doesn't go to sales and say, sell more stuff. He goes to procurement and says, get me 2 cents a share, and as you say, that trumps everything. Questions from the audience? We have 3 smart guys, and the subject is negotiating tips. Yes?
I'm assuming there's a lot of training that goes on as you start, educating and bringing these teams together. Are there third-party firms that you use? And if you do, could you share the names? And if it's done internally, how has that been developing over time?
I haven't heard of any firms.
Have a microphone.
I certainly haven't engaged any firms to help train and educate our teams. Perhaps it's something that we could ask Mr. Finneran to help identify and organise for us as part of the 4As.
We use a company called Scottworks.
For negotiating.
Yeah,
Okay.
They're very good.
And they've actually come in and done tailored their classes for
like
Right.
our account leads.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so we have used ScottWorks as well for internal training, and we think they're terrific for the nuts and bolts of actual training. But we also used another group called the Consensus Building Institute. I think that's what they're called. They're part of Harvard, actually. And they've come in and done some tremendous work. But I'll tell you, the real lesson that they have taught us, it's not about how good or smart or clever a negotiator you are. It has to do with whether your internal team is aligned. And so often you go into a negotiation and the CEO is thinking one thing, but the CFO is thinking something entirely different, and they get torn apart. So that is the real learning in terms of negotiation.
Linda?
Earlier in the day, it was mentioned that a lot of times in the big organizations with procurement, the same people who 4 years ago were buying, widgets and chemicals are now buying marketing services and dealing with advertising agencies. Do you have any programs in place to invite any of these procurement people that came up the ranks from the chemical side of the business, so to speak, over into your organizations to try to help them understand how we work?
Want to take it?
We've had different agency days with some of the procurement people. I think one of the approaches I try to take is, sort of figure out where exactly each procurement person you're dealing with is on the spectrum of how much marketing experience they do or don't have, how much negotiation skill they do or don't have. Procurement's really kind of a buzzword for client negotiator. It could be any number of people in a procurement role or acting in a procurement way, right? So for the less experienced people, I think you have to take a different approach, take a much more basic negotiating approach. I think you have to be careful not to talk too much about educating them because it kind of ticks them off. You sound fairly, agencies are very good at sounding superior to procurement people, which doesn't help your case. You can bring them along.
I don't really mean educate that, but do
No, I'm sorry, but I'm reacting
do
to
you
what
try
I've
to
heard
expose
before.
them to our industry at all so that they understand, how we work with ideas and those things, and that's all I meant from that.
Things like agency, bring them into the agency, talk a bit about how our processes work. That can help. It depends, if they want to be helped.
I would just add one thing, which is, and in this same study, the ANA study, the good, the bad, and the ugly, they did point out that procurement has gotten much more professional as it pertains to our industry. So I think something that you're probably talking about 10 years ago, absolutely, they were used to buying widgets. They've educated themselves. They've brought in people actually, and even steal people from our industry now who work against us. So I think you have to be careful to make the assumption that the people are not necessarily geared up for our industry.
You're good, Darren.
I think as I talked a little bit earlier in my presentation, I think it's an important way to control the discussion and control the conversation. And I actively encourage our account leads to introduce our organisation to the procurement departments. And why do I do that? Well, because I want to basically articulate the message of how we as a business want to be compensated. I don't want to wait to the 12th hour when I'm suddenly having to renegotiate my contract for them to dictate to me the terms that they feel is acceptable. I'd much rather completely out of cycle. So I generally try to hit procurement people in June when it's sunny outside and they're not talking about money. And I like to then have a conversation with them about telling them what's important to our business and why it's important for us to be paid the way we want to be paid.
One question for the audience. How many of you think you sell a premium product for which you are not paid a premium? Personally, I think our biggest issue is we haven't been able to convince our clients that we're worth it. And that's why we're having all of these discussions. And it just kills us. It kills us. I'm sorry, there's a question in the back. Yes, sir.
Just an observation. How we don't really prepare for negotiations. I think we tend to prepare, we rehearse for new business presentations, we prepare when we're going into show creative work. But more often than not, we tend to walk into a client's lobby and meet for the first time and walk in for a negotiation and come out scratching our heads, sort of questioning what hit us. Do you and your organizations actually prepare for negotiations before you go? Is there a strategy? Are there people playing specific roles?
I absolutely believe there is a strategy. In the same way I believe that, and I said earlier, that you need to ensure that your agency has a consistent approach to how you're being compensated. I think the way that manifests itself in the negotiation is that each agency should have their own sales deck, i.e. the tool that you use to present how you want to be compensated to the client. And that becomes a standard tool that's used throughout all of your business. And once you have that standard tool, you are automatically preparing your agency for a stronger discussion. And what I would also say is that one of the things that I found tremendously valuable, and Tom talked about it earlier, is go to school on your client's business. Understand exactly their own financial performance. I was in a negotiation with a very large multinational client who was adamant that the profit margin that I should just earn was 10%. And it did not take me long to pull out the chairman's comments from that company that clearly articulated that marketing was the big driver of its financial performance and success that year. And furthermore, it explained why they were earning a 22 margin. How could that procurement person sit opposite me when they didn't even know the financial performance of their own company? And that it would be reasonable for me to expect the same, particularly as their chairman had made such great remarks about our work.
And believe me, corporate communications tried to get that sentence taken out. That's going to cost you putting that in there. Questions? Yes.
As an account person on a relatively stable, large piece of business, and I am regularly interacting with procurement on some of the nuances we'd like to optimize in our contract. How do you, because you're experts in negotiation.
It's one thing I've learned in actually studying negotiation. You've got to take the emotion out of it, right? Not get emotionally involved. I mean, a classic procurement funnel is to get you emotionally involved. By emotional, I mean pissed off, afraid, demonizing procurement as a bad guy. That's an emotional involvement. Then they're in your head. It's really all about sort of focusing on the facts, being as prepared as you can, you know, aligning your team internally, doing all the research, you know, just simply not engaging in these mind games on overhead rates and whatever else it is, and trying to stay back to the message, ask a lot of questions. And if you're aligned like that and you keep it unemotional, and I do not always succeed because they can get under my, you heard my reaction before of the not pay for bonuses thing. That just hits me every time, you know. But then we have a lot more leverage than we think we do. Right? I'm not saying we're going to win. If a client comes in and, you know, demands a certain price or a certain, we don't win every time. But most of these threats are they're threats. They're not negotiating positions. They're tests to see how you react. So the key is to try not to get emotionally involved. You know, it doesn't work all the time, but it really helps.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, he said asking lots of questions, but the kinds of questions that we're taught to ask are what-if scenarios. What would you prefer? Would you prefer this more than that? So you can kind of corner them into what's really important to their side. I'd like to take over the moderator role now and see if I could ask a question to my brother Mark here, because Mark had a great story that he told us when we all met for the first time outside here, but it just shows the fear of talking about money in our business, that we're so afraid. So I would just ask Mark to tell the story. You don't have to give any client names.
All right. In my role as CMO, before BBDO, I was at Fallon for many years. And in the early part of this century, we were approached by one of the leading consumer electronics brands. And the chief marketing officer called me up and he said, we're going to spend between $30 and $35 million. This was a brand that you all know, you probably all have in your home. And it was very exciting. He said, we haven't marketed, we're thrilled, we're going to do this, it's great. I make it a point to always, always, always have a financial conversation in the first conversation with the client, because I just want to sniff it out and understand it. You would never go into a car dealership and not look at the window. Well, it's exactly the same thing. So we're having this conversation, I'm asking him all these questions about his business and his goals and everything. And as he's explaining it to me, I interrupted and said, for us to do the kind of effort that you're talking about, setting media planning and buying to the side for a second, because you already have a partner for that, I think this is going to probably require a fee from the agency of $3 to $4 million, and I just want to make sure that that ballpark is acceptable to you. So that's how I phrased it. It's going to probably take $3 to $4 million. And he just started to laugh, and he laughed and he laughed. He said, well, we pay our current agency $400,000 a year, and I don't expect to pay much more than that to the new agency. And I tried to get him to define that, and he said, well, I have another $100,000 in the budget, so $500,000. So I declined. I said, well, to do the things that you're talking about, it's not going to be possible. I'm really sorry. Thank you for calling us. A week later, I open up the trades, and 4 of the 10 largest agencies in the world, many represented, in fact, all represented in this room, have announced that they are finalists, whatever, that they're all going to pitch this piece of business, these 4 agencies. I guarantee you, none of them had the financial conversation that I had. I guarantee it. So, think what's about to happen. 4 agencies are going to burn a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of energy, and then 2 months from now they're going to find out that the guy's got $400,000 and maybe he can spend $500,000, and then what do you do? And it's a $33 million effort, and it requires the staffing it takes to do that. So the tip that I would give you is don't be shy about talking about money early and make decisions quickly, because it's going to cost you a lot if you don't. So the lightning round, what one tip would you give the audience? And we'll start with Rick.
Well, I already touched on it. It's not to get emotionally involved. A negotiator and I've worked with, the trainer, said everyone has a great plan, says Muhammad Ali, until you get punched in the face, right? And all of a sudden your head's spinning. And that's where you have to be prepared in advance and not respond emotionally to buttons people are going to push. And if we're able to do that, ask those probing questions early and often, not concede early in the negotiation, be aligned as a team, we have a lot more leverage than it would appear that we do.
Steve?
When you get back down to the final moments, you're thinking it's always about price. Rarely is the decision made on price alone. And you will always have an opportunity to come back if they really think you're terrific.
That's great. Darren?
So one thing I haven't said, which is I just believe we shouldn't rush to negotiate on salaries and hours. I mean, it seems like all too often that the request from all of us is give us the transparency and the detail. And I think that that should not be the first thing we do.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.